I just want to have a quick discussion with whoever decided on this intro for Alien 3. Just a little something quick behind closed doors, just a little. I just want to know deep down in your head what your thoughts were and why you came to this decision. Hello everyone, Bob87 here, and welcome to another review of the Alien franchise. This one's going to be the 1992 David Fincher film, Alien 3. You got an absolutely... The directorial track of Ridley Scott, James Cameron, David Fincher. Wild in terms of that... opening. Unfortunately for David Fincher, he got kind of handed a mess. This was actually, I believe, his directorial debut. And for a directorial debut, holy shit, this movie is... I mean, we'll get to the positive soon, but there's a lot to say about Alien 3. I don't know how much I will have to say, personally, but it's a very, very divisive, one of the most divisive movies of all time. So Alien 3 is the story of, at the end of Aliens, Ripley, Newt, Hicks, and Bishop take the escape shuttle and go out into space. Unfortunately, they crash land, killing everyone except Ripley, and now Ripley's on this prison planet and needs to figure out a way to escape. That's not a spoiler, it's literally in the first 30 seconds of the movie. How do we get to the positives? Because there are some positives about Alien 3. I don't think this is a bad movie. When I think of what a positive review is, I typically think a 3-star and up is a positive review. This doesn't quite hit that, but it doesn't fall below the 2.5 line. So it's got some merit to it. I think, as I said before, the directing itself is, it's quite good. Your visuals of the actual planet and the infrastructure on the planet and stuff like that still holds firm from Alien and Aliens. So everything still looks great in terms of the space planet, the spaceships, and just the overall environment of the movie feels lively. And I find it to be quite a visually immersive film, just like the first two. And I find that it comes together in a way, in terms of visuals and directing, where you can kind of lose yourself in the directing and you don't have to really focus on how kind of jank the writing is. The directing kind of makes up for it a bit, in just terms of the environments and the settings work very well for the film and help keep it above water, essentially. I think the character dynamics here are still pretty cool, even if they are vastly different than, Alien and Aliens, especially. I don't know why I said especially. It's vastly different from both of those. So you have her crash. You have her crash on this prison planet, and you got the doctor who they're like, the doctor's chilling stuff. You got the prison camp wardens who just want to keep her out of the way of everyone and not cause a ruckus. You got this preacher prisoner guy who's kind of the leader of all the prisoners. You got the prisoners themselves. There's just so many different character molds here, and it's nothing revolutionary, most likely. I think it does work pretty well to keep the writing moving. Again, the way that these Alien movies work with each other, specifically Aliens and Alien 3, is you have the Ripley character, and then everyone else is bouncing off the Ripley character. And that is how we get a bunch of the story plot elements to move forward. You just have the Ripley character, and then you have all these other characters that interact with her character. And, each film does it in a very different way, where it goes from co-workers to military to prisoners and stuff. But this one especially, I feel like, is kind of driven by the fact that the characters kind of work together well. Not like they don't like, not that, you know what I mean. Like the character dynamics work together well. That's not to say all the characters are great or the characters are memorable, but I think that when we're talking about the characters themselves and how they interact with Ripley, I feel like it helps keep the movie, excuse me, somewhat flowing, and it works out. The characters work out in a way where it doesn't. It keeps the plot moving forward. There does feel like some character development here in how they interact with Ripley and stuff. So, you know, it works out very well. I think that this movie, I kind of do enjoy the fact that it kind of goes back to the original in a somewhat okay way, instead of the more action-centric Aliens, which, if you saw my Aliens review and you know, I usually don't prefer more action-centric horror movies to grounded horror movies, but I do in this franchise specifically. This movie actually takes the first Alien approach, where you just have one xenomorph, like xenomorph dog, and a bunch of people without any weapons, really. And I found that this movie works better than even in the first. Oh, excuse me. I found that this movie works even better than the first two in terms of these characters feeling like they're really scrambling and improvising and like guerrilla fighting this xenomorph threat, and it works in a way. I always say it works in a way, but you know, it feels to me like these characters really are just, they don't know what the fuck they're doing and they're scrambling, and that creates an element of suspense and tension where any of them could fuck up at any point because they don't know what the hell they're doing. So it works out pretty well, and I just feel that it, that element of things does come together pretty nicely. I think there is probably something that should be said about some of the performances here. You got, I think you got great performances from the warden. You got great performances from the doctor. I'm sorry, I don't remember their names. This is easily, I would say, the most forgettable of the Alien films, apart from the opening. But I think the doctor, especially, I really enjoyed his character and how he's like very cautious in terms of believing Ripley right off rip, but he also doesn't really give a shit because he's still on a prison planet. So I think his character kind of works well, and the preacher, prisoner, the kind of the leader that brings them all together, I think it works very well. And I think their performances work well to bring those characters in a way where you probably normally you don't give a shit about them, but in terms of like those character dynamics, you normally would just be throwaways. But I think they kind of work well in here, where you actually find them to be not only entertaining but kind of intriguing. Something I suppose I should say that this film has earned is that when you actually have, the aftermath of Ripley, everyone being dead in the ship except Ripley. Again, not a spoiler. Literally the opening 2 minutes, 30 seconds of the film. I mean, it's one of the most famously horrible openings anyway, so you probably know it. I think that what they actually do with it is pretty okay. Like, it obviously should not have happened in the way it did, but they did it. They killed these characters off, and I think if you are going to do that, which they shouldn't have, you need to have Ripley feel like, you need to have Ripley be upset about it. And they do take a good chunk of time in the first act, especially, to really bring it home. You have your autopsy scene with Newt, where she's finding her body, and you have the big funeral scene, which is probably my favorite scene in the movie, is the cremation scene. Not because I'm a fucking psychopath. I just think it works pretty well with the characters and some of the performances that we get here. We're gonna talk about Sigourney Weaver, this performance here in the mixed. I'm sorry, this is probably her weakest performance of the 4 she's in. But I think in that specific scene, everyone tries their hardest, and my favorite parts of the movie are a result of everyone else from the second film dying. Even though them dying as a whole is one of the worst choices in cinematic history, but everything that comes about it in this film is probably my favorite parts of the film, which is very weird, even though it's weird. The specific scenes of the funeral scene, the cremation scene, the autopsy scene, those all are very, they work extremely well. So, I gotta give credit where credit's due on that. Let's start with the ending here. Let's get into, not really, I won't get into spoilers, I suppose, if you're really worried about Alien 3. But I thought the film ended in a way where it made sense. I think it was a good ending. If this was the final film, it would have been even better, or at least the final Ripley film would have been even better if it wasn't Alien Resurrection that came out, which we'll talk about next video or whenever. But I think it does work pretty okay with the, I think her character development over the years and decades that these 3 films take place in. Because in reality, this is like a couple of, like 2 weeks. Probably less. Like, Alien 1, 2, and 3 take place over probably 75 years. Yet it's probably only about a week for Ripley with all of the cryo sleep she's in. So I think how that ending kind of fits in, especially when she's like about to fight it and it's like, you've been in my life. When she's about to fight the xenomorph and she's like, you've been in my life for as long as I can remember. I don't remember anything else before you. I think the ending works completely for going that route, and it works. The ending works for me personally. It works. The ending works for me personally, I think. Let's get to the mixed. And as I said, Sigourney Weaver's acting in this film specifically, I feel she didn't give the best performances of, of this trilogy. I wish, I don't know. It's like the action scene, she's fine. The dramatic scene, she's fine. But when it comes to actually like the somber scenes, like where she's supposed to be really sad, except for the autopsy and the cremation scene, it just doesn't. It's just not great. Like when she's crying in the ship itself, or like she's first seeing their bodies, it just doesn't work. It just isn't. It just doesn't really come off as genuine, I suppose. I don't think she didn't try, but it just didn't work. It's in the mix because obviously, as I said, there are a multitude of moments of great acting from her in this film, but there are definitely a lot of moments of not good acting in this film, which is why it's a mixed opinion, And now the negatives, and exactly what the biggest fucking negative of Alien 3 is. What the fuck? What the fuck? Really? I mean, you take one of my favorite films of all time in Aliens. Big, climactic, great ending, and in the beginning, you kill every character except the main one. Why? What the fuck is the point? Why? You couldn't do anything else? You could do anything else? There was no other way you could have done this. You couldn't have been like, why not? Like, even if you wanted to do the ending, you could have still had them survive and be put, like, have Newt and Hicks confined to the med bay. Like, Ripley is supposed to be confined to the med bay the whole movie. Have Newt and Hicks also confined to the med bay. They don't have to leave. You can give them 3 scenes. You can give them 3 scenes. You can give them just a couple little blips of dialogue, 1 scare with the xenomorph. You do not have to murder them in the opening minute of the movie. There's no other way you could get Ripley alone for this movie. There's none. You just had to kill them in the first minute. There's nothing else you could have done at all. Nothing. Really? I won't. Why am I holding these so? That's just, something to fidget with, I guess, while I'm yapping. It's been talked about ad nauseum for 30, almost 35 years at this point. And I didn't grow up with Alien or Aliens, so I figure the people who did grow up with those movies would be significantly more pissed off than I am. But even then, we always have constant discussions in the horror community about what's the best horror opening of all time. Your opening scene into your title card, opening credits shot with the music and stuff, which is definitely part of the opening scene to me. Is it Scream? Is it House with 1,000 Corpses? Devil's Rejects? Even Final Destination Bloodlines I would throw into that category. The new one. But we never have to have discussions about what's the worst horror opening of all time, because everyone for the past 3 decades and a half has unanimously agreed that Alien 3 is the worst horror opening of all time. Of all time. It just doesn't get any worse than that opening. My other negative, I got one more negative for you guys, and this was the first film they really started to use CGI, and it looks like shit sometimes. Where you have the xenomorph it looks like it's it's just like a walking GIF animation, and it's literally just like, you do the tracing to cut it out of a background, and then you just plaster it in the movie. It like the color scheme is all you can see like the border of it. It's just a loop animation. The CGI on our xenomorph here in this film looks absolutely dreadful. And I don't know, man. It's just not. It just doesn't work. I really wish we kept the practical effects, especially since I don't know what the budget is. It's Alien 3. I can't imagine it had a super low budget. I don't know why we can just keep doing what we did in the first 2 movies. No, I would say this is the worst CGI in the whole franchise. It's not great in Resurrection, but it gets a little bit better in Resurrection. When they do the CGI, when they do the normal xenomorph, it looks great. CGI xenomorphs do not look good at all in this opening quadrilogy. No, you know what I mean. 4 movies. Yeah. Is it overhated? I don't know, because I think people give it much lower ratings than it really deserves. But I still think it is fair if you watch the opening minute of the movie and you can't get by it at all. You just can't stomach it. You can't, you watch the opening minute and then you can't get back into the movie. It just kind of completely is destroyed for you. And I get that. I can personally get by it and move on somewhat quickly, 20 minutes later. But it definitely leaves a bit of a negative taste in my mouth, the opening. But the rest of the movie actually does have some merit to it, so I gotta give it credit for that. So I'm gonna give Alien 3 a 2.75 out of 5 stars. But let me know if you grew up with those first two films and this movie's absolutely never, it's ruined for you. You can never watch it again. I don't know why I'm still holding these. I'm sorry. It is really just something to fidget with. If you can't get by the opening minute of this movie, which I understand, let me know down there. If you actually think this is an underrated masterpiece, I'd be willing to entertain that discussion, even though I wouldn't agree with you because there are other problems outside of the opening. I didn't really talk about any other negative outside of, you know, the intro, but the rest of the movie does have some problems that I didn't really touch on in terms of just general pacing, it being slow. So, you know, but still, tell me if you love this movie deep down, and let me know anything else you want to let me know. Thank you all for watching. Bookman87 out.